right, so we begin. We're holding on 46B2. Mem Vav Amid Bays number 2 in the art scroll. So just to review where we're standing. We're standing as follows. The Mishnah on the bottom of Amid Aleph, on Mem Vav Amid Aleph 46A at the bottom, had a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. The case was where we had dough in which we separated out challah, but the dough and therefore the challah were tamei and it's Pesach. So here's the problem. You're only allowed to cook and bake or set a fire on Yom Tov for the needs of l'tzarech achila, for the needs of your food, for your needs of your meals that you're going to have on Yom Tov. The Torah allowed us to do this. But since challah, which is tum, is not allowed to be eaten by anybody, even the kohen, that means it's not l'tzarech achila, it's not for your needs of your food because you're not allowed to eat it, which means that you're not allowed to bake it or cook it on Yom Tov. So if you're not allowed to bake it and cook it on Yom Tov, you have a secondary problem that the challah will then keep rising and become chametz. So you were left in a no man's land. What do I do with this chametz? So Rabbi Eliezer said, this is what you're going to do. Since challah requires a declaration, this is challah, don't declare. Separate it from the big dough, bake both of them, the dough and the thing, and the challah, less than 18 minutes, longer leaven, it can no longer rise, and then you'll name it challah. And Rabbi Yeshua said, nah, just separate it out. The moment you separate it, it's no longer yours. If it's no longer yours because it now belongs to the Kahanim, there's no problem anymore of you shall not see, you shall not find on Pesach for chametz, because the Torah says, Lo yireh lecha, you shall not find of yours. Yours you shouldn't find. But if it belongs to somebody else, it's not a problem. So the Gemara came along and said, all right, maybe they're arguing in something called Toivus Hana, the benefit of gratitude. Rabbi Eliezer said, benefit of gratitude since I can choose which kohen I want to give the challah to. So there's a Toivus Hana, and therefore therefore, since it's a Toivus Hana, says Rabbi Eliezer, it's worth money. It has a value to you. If it has a value to you, you have a certain amount of ownership in it, even after you separate the challah, and therefore you can you have to bake it in order to stop the chametz because you have a certain amount of ownership. Rabbi Yeshua said, no, it has no value. Toivus has no value, and once you separate it, it goes out of your reshus, out of your property, and therefore there's no problem about your rabbi mutz. And then the Gemara said, no. The Gemara then said, no. The truth is everybody holds Toivus Hana has no value. The benefit of gratitude has no value. What are they arguing about? The theory, the principle of hoyel, of sins. Rabbi Eliezer holds of sins. He says, since challah is done through a declaration, just like a neder, just like a promise, because it's done by a declaration. You're allowed to do mefer nedarim. You're allowed to annul your promises by going to a sage, by going to a chacham, and having him go ahead and annul it. You're also allowed to do that for chametz, for challah, since you could also annul. Since I could say that, therefore, from the beginning, it's still in your property. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to drive ourselves crazy. I don't hold it, this whole principle of sins, of hayil. And therefore, once you separate it out, it's out. We look at things ba'asher hu sham, as they are now. And we don't worry about some sins that might happen. We're not going to worry about that. That's where we are. And now we're up to 46B2. okay? And right on the top, on the left-hand corner. And from this point on, the whole Gemara today is going to be about this subject of this principle of since, of hoyel. Since I could say, and we're going to take it in many different directions.
Can I ask
Itmar,
you?
says the
Can I
Gemara.
ask one question?
Sure. Yes,
You don't have to
please.
answer it right now
Go ahead.
because maybe you'll answer it as you do the whole daf. But
Right.
how is Holol related to Erev Tavshilin? Is it?
Okay. It's not, it is, and it is the concept of Erev Tavshilin, which we're about to get to, is a separate thing. But depending on how you look at it, is how we get it. Let's, you know what, Charlie, ask me that question in 5 minutes. Okay? 5 minutes, ask me that question. So, Itmar, we learn like this. We just said that we're allowed to cook and bake and set a fire for the needs of eating on Yom Tov. But what happens if you go ahead and you decide to be clever and you cook on Yom Tov for Yom Tov and for the weekday that's coming? So if let's say today is Yom Tov, so you cook today and you cook plenty of food so that you have food for tomorrow, for the weekday. So if somebody cooks or bakes on Yom Tov for the weekday, which is obviously not allowed because you were only allowed to set a fire and cook and bake for the needs of Yom Tov, Rav Chizda says, Midiyah Raisa, you get Malchus. Midiyah Raisa, you're going to get Malchus. You're going to get lashes. Rabba Ama Ein Aloika, you don't get lashes. Rav Chizda Ama Aloika, Rav Chizda says you get lashes. There's no question about it. Hoyel loy amrinon, because we don't say hoyel umikalale orchim avele, that if guests should visit him in the afternoon, so even though he baked more than he needed for Yom Tov, with the idea that it's going to be for the weekday, but since guests might come and eat up the food, right? Therefore, there's enough food here for the guests that might show up on Yom Tov. We don't say that. You do not get Malchus. I mean, on Hoyel, because we say, since it's true you bake this food for the weekdays, but since there's plenty of time for guests to show up on Yom Tov, that's what we're going to assume, and therefore you don't get Malchus. So, Amalei Rabba Rav Chizda. So now Rabba comes and argues on Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says we do not say Hoyel, and now we get to the sugya that Charlie was just talking about. Lidida, to you who do not the damin and lo yamin and Hoyel, that does not say Hoyel, does not say the idea of since. Hey, oifin mi Yom Tov l'Shabbos. How, according to you, are we allowed to cook and bake on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos? If Yom Tov falls out on a Friday, we're of course allowed to bake and cook for the Yom Tov itself, but the halacha is you're also allowed to cook and bake for the needs of Shabbos. According to Rabbi, he says, I say Hoyel. You can bake food for the next day because I say maybe guests will come today. But you, Rav Chizda, who say we do not say Hoyel, and we don't make an assumption that guests might come, how am I allowed to cook for tomorrow for Shabbos? It's a diaraisa, according to you. You get Malchus when you cook for the next day. So yeah, Amalei Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda, what are you talking about? We have an answer. Mishum Eruv Tavshilin. The Chachamim made something called Eruv Tavshilin. As you know, we do it here. We take a matzah, we take a hard-boiled egg, and we make a statement that says before Yom Tov, we make that whatever I'm going to cook for this, I could cook for that. Right? They made a system by which you're allowed to do Eruv Tavshilin. On this, Frank Rabbo right back, Umishum Erev Tavshilin, which is a dirabanan, Sharinen Isure Diaraisa, you Rav Chizda are going to push off a biblical prohibition? Does that make any sense? Erev Tavshilin was something established by the Rabbanon to be able to cook from Shabbos, from Yom Tif to Shabbos. That's only rabbinical. Biblically, Rav Chizda, you just said that if I bake today on Yom Tif for the next day, for the weekday, or for Shabbos, logically, as like, because the heter of baking and cooking is only on Yom Tif for Yom Tif. So if I bake and cook for the next day, right, I get malchus according to Rav Chizda because I don't say since. I don't say hoil that people will come. So you want to tell me I'm allowed to do it because of a rabbinical decree that we could do it because of Erev Tavshilin. I'm allowed to. Erev Tavshilin is only a Rabbanan. According to you, that doesn't help you lift a biblical prohibition. So how does Erev Tavshilin work for you? So he answers, Amalei. So Rav Chizda explains, and Midiya Raisa, biblically speaking, Sarche Shabbos Nasa B'Yontif. Biblically speaking, you're absolutely allowed to go ahead and bake and cook on Yom Tif for the needs of Shabbos as well. As Rashi explains, the second wide line towards the bottom. If you look at the Rashi, second wide line, Diksiv in Shemais Yud Beis, that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Ach asher yeyochel l'chol nefesh v'Shabbos v'Yontav chada kedushi. The pasuk says, Ach asher yeyochel l'chol nefesh. This is the pasuk that allows us to cook and eat on Yontif, because this pasuk came ahead and said what he called that you could eat anything any food that's for a person. This is what you're allowed to go eat for Yom Tif. You're allowed to eat. And it goes, and Shabbos and Yom Tif is one Kedusha. The Tavayu Shabbos Ikri. Because in the Torah calls Shabbos, and the Torah calls Yom Tif by the name Shabbos. Many times in the Torah will use the word Shabbos in talking about Yom Tif. And therefore, in any place where you're allowed to cook and bake on that day, i.e. Yom Tif for its use, you can go ahead and cook and bake for the next day as well, which is Shabbos. So when Yom Tif is followed by a Shabbos, the pasuk is clear, says Rav Chizda, that you're allowed to do it. There is no problem with that. That's not what we're talking about. The only problem, says Rav Chizda, is if you cook and bake on Yom Tif for the weekday. That's a different kettle of fish. But to cook and bake on Yom Tif for Shabbos, since Yom Tif is also called Shabbos in the Torah, right? They're connected as one long Kedusha. So then how is it that we're not allowed to do it without an Erev? The answer is, the Rabbanon who degeize gezerah. And it's the Rabbanon, the rabbis that came along and decreed against cooking and baking on Yom Tif for Shabbos, Shema Yoimru Oifim Yom Tif Af L'chol, because people will then make the mistake and say, well, if I'm allowed to bake, to cook today on Yom Tif for the next day, which is Shabbos, they'll make the obviously logical leap. I'm allowed to cook today and bake today on Yom Tif for the next day, even if it's Chol, even if it's the weekday. And then the Chiven, the Atzrif, the Itzruche, Rabbanan, a Ruvei Tavshilin. And then since the Rabbanan came ahead and established the idea of Erev Tavshilin, Islay Hakera, they made, which means that Erev Tavshilin is merely a sign. It's a sign, it's a signpost that says, Yom Tif to Shabbos, I'm allowed to cook and bake because of this Erev Tavshilin. Yom Tif to weekdays, I'm not allowed to. So now to answer Charlie's question, The reality is that Erev Tavshilin has nothing to do with Hoyel. Erev Tavshilin, according to Rav Chizda, who does not hold of Hoyel, says as follows. The reality is you're allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, because Minat Torah Yom Tov is also called Shabbos. It's all one long thing. The Rabbanim were geyser against it because we're afraid you might come to cook from Yom Tov to the weekdays. And we established Erev Tavshilin to put back the permission midiraisa of cooking from Yom Tov to Shabbos and put up a signpost post. Only where I have an Erev Tavshilin am I allowed to, and where I don't have an Erev Tavshilin, I'm not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to the weekday. Rabbah. Why does Rabbah need an Erev Tavshilin? Why does Rabbah need an Erev Tavshilin if he says Hoyel? Because you can always say, I could bake today, right? I could bake today because Hoyel, since guests might be showing up. So why do I need Hoyel? And the answer is because you need an Erev Tavshilin for this reason. What happens if somebody wakes up 1 hour to go on Yom Tov, says, oops, Shabbos is coming, or the weekdays, I want to bake. There, with regard to, according to Rabbah, if there's no time left in the day for guests to show up, then you can't say Hoyel. The Hoyel doesn't work. The Hoyel doesn't work, only works if it's early enough in the day that guests can still arrive. But if there's only an hour to go to Yom Tov, you can't say Hoyel that maybe Orchim will come. So then, according to Rabbi, you would not be able to cook and bake for the next day. That would be impossible. And the only way you were able to do it, if in regard to Yom Tov to Shabbos, is with the Erev Tavshilin. Okay, Charlie, does that sort of explain it? Whoops, is anybody there? Or did we get cut off? Can somebody please let me know? Jeff, we're still there? Okay, great. And I'm going to assume that we're there, Charlie, because if Jeff's there, that everybody's there. Okay, so we are now on 46b3. Okay, so Rabbah goes ahead and challenges Rav Chizda's rejection of the idea of sins, of Hoyel. Esvei, behema hamusukenes loy yishchat. You have a behema, an animal, a cow, that's terribly, terribly sick. And you go ahead and you quickly run, and it's Yom Tov. So you quickly run to shecht it, to slaughter it. As Rashi explains, v'roitza lishchait b'Yom Tov. You want to shecht it, you want to slaughter it on Yom Tov, shaloi tamus, so it shouldn't die and become a nevela. And shouldn't, because an animal that dies without proper sacrifice becomes a nevela, and it's also to eat. And therefore, then it'll be a complete financial loss. Since it will be a complete financial loss. By the way, Charlie, did I answer your question regarding Erev Tavshilin?
You did. Thank you. Perfect.
Whoops. Okay. Good. Okay, good. I wanted to make sure. Okay. So over here, we're dealing with a case where the behemoth is really sick. And so you quickly rush, even though I don't need the behemoth for food. I don't need to eat. I ate already in the morning. My wife gave me an unbelievable Sudis Yom Tov. I had a wonderful Yom Tov meal. I'm packed to the gills. Fine, but here's the problem. I go outside. I check out my price, right, that I was going to make thousands of dollars off its meat. And oh, lo and behold, it's about to die. Now, if it dies without shechita, without being slaughtered, it's a complete loss. It's a complete loss because it becomes a nevela, and you got to get rid of it. Shecht it on Yom Tov. Do you shecht it on Yom Tov? Here's the problem. Obviously, you shefted it on Yom Tov. The only reason you were allowed to shecht it on Yom Tov is l'tzairech achila, for your food needs, for your meals that you need, but you didn't need this for your meals. So, the Gemara, the Mishnah says, a behemoth that's deathly ill should not be slaughtered on Yom Tov. Ela Kedei, only Sheyochel, that it should be possible Le'echel Yemena Kizayah Day, that he would be able to, that he would be able to eat a olive's volume, a kazayas of roasted meat while it was still day. The reason why it says tzili roasted only because that's the fastest way of preparing meat. You quickly take a blowtorch and you roast it up. If you cook it, it's definitely going to take too long, right? So you roast it up. The roasted is lav dafka. It's not just roasted, but that's what it says. Yochel, but you'll notice the language here. Kedei sheyochel, so that you're capable of eating. Doesn't say so that you will eat a kazayas, only that it should be possible that you could eat a kazayas. Yochel le'echel. It says in this price that he will be able to eat the meat on Yom Tov, should he slaughter it. Af al gav deloy boil lemechel, but not that he actually has to eat the meat. Now, Bishlema says, Rabba, lididi to me, Damin and Hoyel, that I stole. You can argue that since if he wants to eat it, he could eat it, right? So even if he doesn't eat it, I can sense there's a possibility that I could eat it. Okay, it works out. It's all right, I'm allowed. So I'm allowed to slaughter this deathly ill animal. But you, Rav Chizda, the loy damer, loy amin and hoyel, that says we do not say hoyel, right? Amay yishchait. Why are you allowed to slaughter it? Since it over here it says only on the I could eat it, not that I have to eat it. Wait a minute. According to you, I would have to eat it because I have no way of saying since that because I could eat it. Therefore, it's as if I ate it. That's no such thing. So how is it that Rav Chizda allows me to go ahead and be over on a dioraisa, on a biblical prohibition, which says I'm not allowed to slaughter anything unless it's for my food needs on Yom Tov. This is clearly not for my food needs on Yom Tov. This is merely to save yourself from a financial loss. Amalei, Mishur, so says Rav Chizda, loss. So of course, Rabbi jumps all over this. Because you're worried about a financial loss, you can go ahead and do something that's biblically prohibited, which is to slaughter an animal not for the needs, not for the needs of eating on Yom Tov. How does this make sense according to Rav Chizda? It only makes sense if I could say hoyel, because since I could come to eat it, it's okay. I can check it even if I don't eat it. But if you don't say that, how do you get the permission to go ahead and slaughter the animal? So Amalei says yes. Mishum hefsin because of this terrible possible financial. Goma believe he's goma in his heart. He resolves in his heart that he's definitely going to eat a kazayas. He knows that the only way he can get out of this financial loss is if he says, even though I'm stuffed to the gills, nonetheless, when I get this, I'm going to quickly roast it and I'm going to eat a kazayas. And the only way you can eat a kazayas, and it's impossible to get to a kazayas basa, to get to eating an olive's volume of meat without proper shchita, without first slaughtering it. So therefore you have to slaughter. And then says Rav Chizda, if after the fact you then don't eat it, okay. But at the moment of shchita, you absolutely had it in mind that you were going to eat. So therefore this baraisa is not a question on me about the fact that I don't hold from the principle of hoyel of sins. So frank the Gemara, now Rav Chizda before said the words, Midia in the previous case, Midia Sarche Shabbos Nasa B'Yontav. Biblically speaking, Shabbos, because it's one long kedusha. Biblically speaking, on this comes Rabbi and he asks on Rav Chizda, Lechem Aponim. What was the Lechem Aponim? The lechem aponim, if everybody remembers, there was the golden table, the shulchan, the shulchan in the base Hamikdash. So it was in the heichal of the base Hamikdash, in the sanctuary of the base Hamikdash. On it was two rows like this with 6 rows on every Shabbos. You put freshly baked challahs that were baked on Friday, were placed on those trays, 6 to each side, and then the 12 challahs that were there were taken off. The challahs from the previous Shabbos were taken off, and miraculously they were piping hot, fresh. And they were given over to the Kahanim. And the Kahanim each got a piece of the lechem aponim. And then the next week, you did the same thing. You bake challahs again on Friday. And you on Shabbos, you reports that you took off, then go to the Kahanim. So it says like this. Esveh. Lechem aponim. The lechem bread. We're now on the daf. Mem Zayin Amid Aleph. Nechol Latisha La'aso La'acharos. Baked on the 9th day from the day it was baked, or on the 10th day from when it was baked, or the 11th day from when it was baked. Not less and not more. Ketzad, what's the case? Kidarkoi Latisha. The usual case, the lechem aponim is eaten on the 9th day, from the day that it was baked. Nefes be Erev Pesach, Erev Shabbos, because when is it baked normally? On Erev Shabbos, good, and therefore, and Nechol b'Shabbos Latisha. It was baked on Erev Shabbos. The next day, which is the second day after it was baked, it goes onto the shulchan, replacing the old lechem aponims. And a week later, 7 days later, i.e., 9 days later, they come off the table and are eaten by the kahanim on the next week. So this is Pashas Shemais this week. So the challahs would be baked tomorrow on Friday, placed on the shulchan in Pashas Shemais, and then taken off the shulchan on Pashas Vayera and given to the kahanim. So that's 9 days. That's the basic situation, 9 days. Chal Yom Tov liyos b'erev Shabbos. If Yom Tov should fall out on Erev Shabbos, so Yom Tov is Friday. If tomorrow was a Yom Tov, then Nechol l'Shabbos la'asoro, you would be 10 days, because we would then have to bake the challahs on Thursday. Friday would be a Yom Tov. Shabbos, you would replace the challahs and put these challahs on the table, and a week later they would eat it. Shnei Yomim Sh'tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah. If we're dealing with that Rosh Hashanah should fall out on a Thursday and a Friday, Rosh Hashanah is always 2 days because Yom HaRichta, because we're never sure, since we're never sure when the Chodesh starts. Is the Chodesh of Elul short, a 29-day Chodesh, or is it long, a 30-day Chodesh? So in order not to confuse anybody, even in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, even in Eretz Yisrael through today, Rosh Hashanah is always 2 days, not 1 day. So, Shnei Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah, Nechol l'Shabbos le'acharosa. It turns out you therefore eat it 11 days after it's baked. Lefi she'ed, why? Because Wednesday it's baked, Thursday and Friday are Yom Tov. Shabbos, you replace the old bread with the spread, and 7 days later, which is 11 days later, you go ahead and take it off and feed it and give it to the kahanim to eat. Lefi, why? Lefi she'ein doicha, the baking of the challahs. Lefi she'ein doicha loyas haShabbos, v'loy es haYom Tov. It's not doicha the Shabbos, and it's not doicha the Yom Tov. B'Rab Chizda, the Amrit, if you say Sarchei Shabbos, Nasim B'Yontiv, that the needs of Shabbos you're allowed to bake and cook. Even on Yontiv, Amai Dochi Yontiv, why don't you bake the Lechem Aponims on Yontiv itself, on the Friday that is a Yontiv, bake it on Friday. It's not needed for Yontiv, it's needed for the next day, which is Shabbos. So what? You're allowed to bake on Yontiv for the needs of Shabbos. So therefore, why do you have to go all the way back to Thursday? Or to Wednesday if it's Rosh Hashanah. On Yom Tov itself, go ahead. On Yom Tov itself, go ahead and bake for Shabbos. Elamai, from here is a raya that we do not say that biblically speaking you're allowed to bake on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos. Amalei comes Rav Chisda. No, there's a big difference. Shavus karoiva hitiru. The rabbinical injunction is permitted where for its immediate purposes. In other words, if you're allowed to bake on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos, when Shabbos is exactly the next day, when the next day that you're going to eat it on Shabbos is the next day. By lechem hakonim, it's true the next day you're going to place it on the shulchan, you're going to place it on the table. But the reality is you're not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it until 7 days later, till next Shabbos. That's when it's taken off, right? Shabbos, Shavuos, Rechaika, Lo Hitiru. A permission for the future, that we do not permit, says Rav Chisda. Because you're right, we needed to place it on the shulchan, but that's not for eating. The heter to go ahead and cook on Yom Tov is l'tzarech achila, for the needs of eating. That you could do for Shabbos as well. But the needs for eating for Shabbos is not this Shabbos when I'm placing the challahs on the shulchan. It's next Shabbos when I take it off the shulchan. That's already many days from now. That I'm not giving you the heter. So, Frank Ravo, that's great, except Rav Shimon ben Gamliel to Amar Mishum Rav Shimon ben Asagan. But according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, who says in the name is Rav Shimon, the son of the vice Kohen Gadol, the second in command to the Kohen Gadol, who said regarding the lechem aponim, the baking of the lechem aponim, doiches es yom tov ain't doiches yom tzoim. It's doicha the yom tov you're allowed to bake on the yom tov for the shulchan's kalas. But you're not allowed to do it on Yom Kippur, meaning if Yom Kippur falls out on a Friday, that you cannot go ahead and bake on Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur has the same name as Shabbos. It's Shabbos Shabbosoim, the Shabbos of all Shabboses. So there, it's not doicha because on Shabbos itself, as we all know, you're not allowed to bake and cook, as we're going to see in a little bit. You're not allowed to bake and cook on Shabbos itself. Right, that you're not allowed to do, right? So Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to bake and cook on Yom Kippur itself because it's also a Shabbos. I need it for the next day for the Shabbos. So what? Shabbos to Shabbos is one long Shabbos. I can't do it. Yom Tov to Shabbos, I'm allowed to do. My Ikalamema, what are you, Rav Chisda, going to say? Rav Shimon, we're on now 47:82. What are you going to say? Rav Shimon holds that one can bake the lechem aponim on Yom Tov. So you see, it was waived even. You see that according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, you're not going to eat it this Shabbos. You're only going to place the chalas on the lechem aponim. You're first going to come to eat it a week from now, the next Shabbos. That's something else. What do you call? You see from over here that even though it's rechaika, many days away, they permitted you to bake on Yom Tov for Shabbos. So what are you, Rav Chisda, going to say? Because now your answer doesn't work out. Says, what are you talking about? That's exactly what we have here. A machlokes between the Tanakama of this brisa and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel of the next one. Marsa, the Tanakama holds that if it's right next door, Yom Shabbos is the next day. That's the permit. But Shavuos Rechaika lo yatiru. But if Shabbos is the eating on Shabbos is not the next day, it's a week from now. They weren't mater. Umar Sava and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel holds Shavuos Rechaika nami yatiru. Even if it's in the future, it's still mutter. And why does Reb Shimon ben Gamliel hold that? Because he said, once I go ahead and I allow one possibility of permission, i.e., where Shabbos is the next day, I say I'm allowed to go ahead and eat on and cook on the Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos the next Once I've said these words, you're allowed to bake on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, for the needs of Shabbos in this case and not in this case. Rav Shimon Gamliel says that's not the way halacha works. Halacha works. You create a rule. I'm allowed to cook on Shabbos I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos. Then I'm allowed to do it. Whether the Shabbos is next, whether I'm going to eat it on the Shabbos, which is tomorrow, or whether I'm going to eat it on the Shabbos, which is next week. That I don't care. Okay, so according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, theoretically, a person could cook on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos and freeze the stuff that he cooked for Shabbos, put it in the freezer, and pull it out in 2 months and have it for Shabbos in 2 months. Because once I'm allowed, I'm allowed. Says Rav Chizda, the Tanakama, who I hold like, says absolutely not. It's a limited heter, it's a limited permission, permitted only to where Shabbos didn't eat, where you're going to eat it on the Shabbos that's coming up the next day, not further along. So again, we have no clarity over here about hoyel and not hoyel, which way we hold. Now, Rav Chizda again said that biblically speaking, you're allowed to cook and bake on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos. Mosif Rav Mori comes my Mori and he asks the question from here. Shtei halechem, ein nechol loy pochas mishnayim. The shtei halechem, what is the shtei halechem? On the Yom Tov of Shavuos, we brought 2 shalomims with 2 special offerings, and with them we brought as well 2 chalas. We brought 2 chalas and we waved the chalas. The chalas were waved around, and then they were given to the kohanim. Says like this: Shtei alechem einay necholos loy pochis mishnayim. The shtei alechem which are offered on Shavuos are not eaten less than 2 days from when they were baked, i.e., the perfect case is you bake it Erev Shavuos, give it over to the kohen on Shavuos, and not more than 3 days go from the time it's baked to when it's eaten. Keita, what's the case? The normal case is Nesayv Erev Yom Tov. You bake it on Erev Yom Tov, v'nechol Yom Tov l'shnayim, and then you eat it on Yom Tov, meaning 2 days. On this, if Yom Tov falls after the Shabbos, so Shabbos was Shabbos and Yom Tov Shavuos was Sunday. Friday. Now, you bake the chalas, the shtei alechem, the bread. But if you're going to say Shabbos Nasim, that the needs of Shabbos.
Is it, excuse me, is it just me about reception, Jeff? Yeah. Yitzchak. Now he's frozen. He's coming back. Because I didn't hear him. He was in and out. I think we need to give him an upgrade on his internet.
Yeah, I know all of a sudden he just kind of froze out there.
Yeah, I know, but I mean,
we should put that in the budget for the shul.
Yeah, 100%. Yitzchak.
Yes.
We're going to have to pay for an upgrade to your internet.
Yes, it's definitely. Or I need to get down to Boca Raton. Let's be honest.
So that's good. Let's go. Come.
So hopefully I'm there Monday. Okay. So there we go.
Great.
Here we go. So once again, so here we go. If we say that the needs of the Shabbos may be prepared on Yontif, this is what we're saying, that on Yontif you're allowed to prepare food for the needs of Shabbos, right? That now the Shabbos be Yontif Shari, that needs of Shabbos are okay to be done on Yontif, beyond me boye, then if I'm allowed to go ahead and cook and bake on Yontif for the needs of tomorrow for Shabbos, then obviously I'm allowed to bake on Yontif for the needs of Yontif. So the shtei alechem are needed when? They're needed on Yontif. Why do I have to bake it Erev Yontif? Let me bake it on Yontif. I'll bake it on Yontif and give it over to the kohen. Why do I have to give it over? What's going on here? Why does it say, as a matter of rule, you have to bake it Erev on the day before Yontif? Says Rav Chizda, Shani Hasam, the Amar Lakra Lochem. The pasuk says like this: however, Asher Yishchat Lechol Nefesh, to anything that's for eating all, that's food for all people. Hu Levadei Yos Yaseh Lochem, for you. Okay, it says for you. If you want to look at it in the art scroll number 16. Okay, you see it over there. That this says for you, which means lochem v'loy legevoya. What food are you allowed to cook on Yontif? This is the pasuk that tells us that you're permitted to cook bake on Yontif for l'tzarech achila, for the needs of eating on Yontif. You're allowed to cook on Yontif for your needs of eating on Yontif. Lochem, your needs. The Lord not for the Most High. The Shtei Alechem belong to who? They don't belong to you. They're holy. They belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They belong to the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Master of the world. He goes ahead and says, by the way, I don't actually need to eat it. Thank you very much. Give it over to you. Oh, the heter, the permission to go ahead, the permission to go ahead and cook and bake on is only for your needs to eat on Yom Tov, not for the needs of a vice Kohen Gadol. Doiches Yom Tov. Michael Amema, who says that you are doiche the Yom Tov. You are doiche the Yom Tov. You're allowed to bake. Who says you're allowed to bake and cook on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos, which means kol shekain. If you could do it for another day, you certainly can bake and cook for your own day on Yom Tov. Michael Amema says Savala Kabashol, who translates the pasuk we just learned, the Oma Lochem. To you, we're now on 47.8.3. Lochem veloy lenochrim. For you, but not for goyim. Meaning, you're allowed to bake and cook on Yom Tov for your own needs. You're allowed to be the Most High for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's needs, but you're not allowed to bake and cook for the needs of goyim, of nochrim. You're not allowed to say, you know what, I'm going to sell rolls tomorrow. I'm baking already today. How to do it. Now, why to do for the Rebbeinu Shalom? Because the answer is, to quote Rabbi Sachs, Zechreinu Levracha, Hashem is the God, is the universal God. And particularly, he's our Father who gave us the Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the universal God of the whole world, but particularly he's our Father. He's our Father. That makes it lochem, to you. He's part of the family. We are called banim atem l'Hashem elokeichem. Children are you to Hashem, your God. We are the children. Children could go ahead and cook and bake for their father. It's not a problem. That's part of lochem. Nachrim, obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is their God, but not their father. That's a different story. We have the Torah. Zokti Gemara Vaita. Sholach lei Rav Chizdol Rabo Biad Rav Acha Baruna. So now Rav Chizdol again is going to question Rabba. How do you, Rabba, say Hoyel? How do you say the principle of sins? Sholach lei Rav Chizdol Rabo Rav Acha Bar Rav Huna. Rav Chizdol sent the following question to Rabba through Rav Acha Bar Rav Huna. Me, I mean, in Hoyel, do we actually say the idea, the principle of Hoyel, of sins? Tanan, we learned, okay, Yesh Chayresh Telem Echad. There is a case where one plows one row, one furrow in a field. And when plowing this one furrow, the Chayovim Aleo Mishum Shmoina Lavim, he's over on 8 Lavim, which means he would get Malchus lashes 8 times. 39 times 8. How does this work? What's the case? It goes like this. Yesh, it goes like this. If somebody plows with a bull and a mule, that's one law, because the Torah says, Lo shar v'chamor, you shall not plow together a shar v'chamor. It's Klayim, okay? V'hein mekuchin, and the two of them, the shar and the chamor, the ox and the donkey, are holy. The shar, the cow, is holy. Give me 1 second. It says like this: Lo savi b'bechar sherecha. You shall not work with the shar that is the firstborn. The firstborn shar is brought up to the mizbeach, is brought up on the altar to be slaughtered. From there, the Gemara learns out to all offerings that once they are mekudesh to be brought up on the mizbeach, on the tabernacle, they no longer could be worked with. So therefore, the shar, who is in this case was mekudesh to be as an offering, and you worked with it, you have chayv on another law of you're not allowed to work on things on animals that were made holy to be brought up on the altar, on the tabernacle. And the chamor, the donkey, which of course is not a kosher animal, so can't be brought on the tabernacle, on the mizbeach, but what it was mekudesh for the bedek habayis, for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. Well, we know if something is mekudesh to be used for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, and you use it inappropriately, you're over on Me'ilah. 3 lavim now. We've got 3 lavim. Ukalayim bekeren. That's the 4th one. Because as you're plowing, there were a bunch of seeds on the ground, different kind of seeds, and by plowing it, you're mixing up all the seeds. And we know you're not allowed to mix seeds together. They have to be individually planted. So now I've got 4. Now we're on Amud Beis, 47b, 1, Ushvius. And guess what year this was? This was Shavius. As you know, there's a 7-year cycle. The 7th year is called Shavius. Look at the top Rashi. The Oiver Mishum Sadecha Lo Tizra. And your field you shall not seed. The Chayrish and plowing told the Zara is a derivative of seeding. So there you go again. That's your 5th. You're not allowed to plow. Be Yontif. And it was on Yontif. And you know, the only way we're allowed to do anything that has to do with food is only if it's for your needs to eat on Yontif. Plowing the field is not for your need to eat on Yontif today. It might be for 6 months from now, but it's not for today. And we've got another one. And Koyin v'nozir b'beis hatoma. And a Koyin who is also a Nazir in a Beis HaTumah, meaning in a cemetery. Look at Rashi right next to this. Koyin v'nozir b'beis HaTumah. Shezeh Beis HaKvaris. Beis HaTumah is a cemetery. V'hu Koyin v'nozir. He was a Koyin and a Nazir. V'yesh kan Koyin. There's a law regarding a kohen shall not be mitama. Kohen is become tumah from regarding a nausea, al nefesh meis lo yavai, to the nefesh meis, to a dead carcass, you shall not approach. So therefore, you've got over here 8 possible lavim. The amrit, says Rav Chisda, the amrit hoyol. But if you go ahead and say hoyol, since acharisha loy lechayev, then it shouldn't be 8, it should only be 7. Because on plowing, I can figure out a way how to get out of it. How? Because by plowing it, you're bringing up the ground, and therefore it's available to cover up the blood of a dead bird, of a bird, which is kisei adam, is a mitzvah min HaTorah, to cover up the blood of a bird. So says the Gemara, Amar Papa Bashmuel, what kind of field are we talking about? Bavonim megur zolos, a pointy stoned field which is not what do you call it, which is not fit for covering the blood. So the Gemara Yisa lechushash. So crush this stones, and now they'll be available to cover over the blood. Katisha be unto me, Shari. Are you allowed to crush stone yontif? So the Gemara Karisha lechushash k'layachiyah. Yeah, you could crush him in an unusual manner. Biblically speaking, unusually, it's not a problem. The Gemara, okay, so I'll tell you, but the field was, but Sanuma, that obviously was not available to be used to cover up blood. Sanuma Bazaria, so the Gemara says, if that's the case, blood, a big field the boulders is not available to cover up the blood bottom. So frankly, so then in that case, you have dirt that's available to cover over the dam. If you said hoyol, since I could use this dirt to cover over the blood, I shouldn't be over on a lav. Betino, we're dealing with mud, and mud is unfit to cover over blood because mud sticks together like clay, and therefore it's not good to cover over the blood. The tina bazaria, but mud, you can plant stuff in mud. Says the Gemara b'misnuta, with very wet mud, it's fit for sowing seeds, but it's not fit. Everybody's asking the same question. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. We're going to stop. If you got the patience, we're going to stop over here. Okay? But we're going to stop over here. But what was just going on? What was just going on? It almost sounds like a teenager's conversation. You did this. No, it's really like this. Okay, so this is the case. This is the case. What is going on here? The answer is, if I am trying to establish a principle, if I'm trying to establish a principle or to establish that there is no principle, it has to be able to work in any case that you can think of that falls within the purview of the principle. I think I once told you guys in Chulin, there's a case of a cow that was pregnant, that was shechted or died. I don't remember the exact case, where the calf rolls out of the mother's stomach and rolls into the womb of another cow. So it rolls out of one cow and rolls into another cow. And the Gemara goes through the whole cheshbon. What's the halacha? It might be the case of a ben pikuah, meaning where if you shech the mother, then you don't have to shech the calf that was inside it because the fetus is considered as part of the mother. It's not its own identity, and to the stomach of another cow. But that wasn't the issue. The Gemara was trying to establish a principle. If you're trying to establish a principle, it has to work. By definition, it has to work in every single type of case. That's what was going on here. If you're going to try to say, my principle of Hoyle doesn't work over here because of cherish could be used for dirt, I have to be able to show that in any possibility, it either could work or can't work. That's why we had this back and forth there, which sounds almost childish, but it's not. in the establishing of the reality of the thing. Anyways, that's where we're up to. We're up to 47B2, and we're going to continue right along